Hello and welcome once again to Capital Dateline. I'm Brad Swanson, your host. We're coming to you once again from the Florida Cable Telecommunications Association's headquarters, just a few blocks from the Capitol. I am once again joined by Jim Saunders, Executive Editor of the News Service of Florida. Morning, Jim.
Morning.
All right, so amidst the present shopping, the Christmas celebrations and the holidays.
Who's doing that?
We're in the Capitol. We are paying attention to what's happening in the Capitol so that we can see what's going to happen to Florida. First on the agenda is Attorney General Bondi. She has been spending time in D.C. recently with President-elect Trump and is on the transition team and is rumored to potentially have a new job. Where does that stand?
Well, the speculation continues that she's going to have a job in the Trump administration. I mean, she was an early supporter of President-elect Trump and was a pretty strong supporter all the way along. A lot of the speculation, or at least some of it, has focused on the possibility of her being the drug czar. That's not the official title, but you know what I'm talking about.
I gotcha.
And that's one of the possibilities. I mean, she's been very involved in drug-related issues, enforcement issues, as Attorney General.
Everything from bath soaps to, you know, I mean,
well, she really, I think, really led the way during her first year in office on the cracking down on the pill mills. Mm-hmm. She really took the lead on that. But then, as you said, I mean, there's been these other synthetic drug issues she's really plunged into, and been a leader on trying to crack down on those. So she kind of has her, she's kind of made her mark in that area. So that's one of the potential jobs that's being discussed. She's not really talking about it at all. I mean,
well, didn't you guys try and figure out what was going on last week?
Yeah, I mean, there was after a cabinet meeting, there was quite a bit of discussion whether trying to get out of her what she might be interested in or what she might be doing.
And she told you everything?
She had met with President-elect Trump a few days before that in New York at Trump Tower, mm-hmm. and but she basically refused to say what they talked about and what the discussion was. Said she didn't think it was appropriate. She is part of the transition team, and she wouldn't comment. But that has not dimmed the speculation at all. Her not taking a real outright position on it. You know, the president-elect continues to name his cabinet members and other members of his administration. So this is kind of trickling out, and I assume over the next a month from now, a little more than a month, when he takes the oath of office, he's going to have his full team in place. So we'll know what she's doing, or maybe she'll wind up staying here. The Governor Scott said he hopes she stays.
Right,
so
right. Well, let's talk about that. So in this political game that we all pay attention to, the next step is what happens if she does. Who fills that slot? What are you hearing?
Well, I mean, there's been some speculation that Governor Scott would name Jesse Panuccio, who used to be Governor Scott's general counsel. Then he was the director of the Department of Economic Opportunity. Now he's in the private sector. He was very close to Governor Scott. Has been. He's also been kind of a lightning rod. A lot of legislators, and particularly senators, didn't like him much. They had a hard time dealing with him. That's just one name. I think one of the issues is, do you appoint somebody who is going to be there a couple years and then go back into the private sector? There's a lot of probably dynamics at issue in terms of who would go into that job. And I think it's a little bit too early to tell until she makes clear what she's going to do.
Right. Well, I'm sure those that have a say have already built their short list just in case.
Well, you can bet that across Tallahassee there are people like making lists and lining up support and so on. So that does go on.
All right, well, let's talk about insurance. That's the next big story right now in Tallahassee. Citizens Insurance, it's the insurer of last resort. It's the post-insurance organization from the JUA. This really was set up as Florida's organization as a backstop, an insurer of last resort. Unfortunately, it's where it's become the insurance of first resort for all lines of insurance that people don't want to carry. So what's happening now with Citizens?
Well, over the past several years, the number of policies covered by Citizens has dropped dramatically. Right. As Florida has not had hurricanes, a lot of small insurance companies have come into the market and picked up policies that might away from Citizens.
Commonly known as takeout policies.
Right. But last week, Citizens had an interesting discussion, and they are projecting now that their policy count's actually going to go up in the coming year. maybe 50,000 policies, somewhere in that range.
What's driving it?
There's an issue that's been going on over the past few years primarily out of South Florida, not exclusively, but primarily out of South Florida. It's called assignment of benefits. But basically what's going on is a large number of water damage claims, like busted pipe types of claims, not hurricane claims, busted pipe types of claims. And the insurance industry, and particularly citizens, are arguing that essentially what happens in assignment of benefits is that homeowners will sign over their benefits to a contractor who will do the work and then pursue payments from the insurance company. And citizens and the insurance industry argues that this is driving up costs, increasing litigation, and now Citizens is saying that a lot of insurers do not want to come into, particularly the South Florida market, and insure people because they're afraid of the potential liability from water claims.
Right.
And they are saying that that's going to lead to more policies with Citizens. The other side of this argument, which includes contractors, trial lawyers, they're saying, that basically people sign over benefits and as a way to make sure that they get their claims paid by the insurance companies.
Right.
And the insurance companies are not always the best citizens in these claims.
Right.
So that's sort of the debate. It's been going on in the legislature for the past couple of years. The insurance industry, and particularly Citizens, has tried to get the legislature to change the law dealing with assignment of benefits, to essentially crack down, tighten up on it. And the legislature has not done that. In fact, it's really not even made it very far in the legislature. Right. There's a lot of competing interests going on. And but Citizens has made pretty clear that they're going to be back to the legislature in 2017 trying to get that changed.
What's your read? Do you think the legislature is going to make time with the limited amount of oxygen they have to work on that issue?
Well, it's going to be difficult. I mean, there's going to be a lot of other issues. I think we're looking at budget issues are rapidly emerging as something that there's going to be a lot of time focused on because money's short, shorter than what the legislature would like. There's other issues like implementing the medical marijuana amendment. There's potentially gambling issues. And workers' comp, which I think is another insurance issue that's going to take up a lot of time and a lot of oxygen. There's only so many things that the legislature, big issues that the legislature typically takes up.
And after the workers' comp, now and we'll go on to workers' comp. I mean, that's an issue right now. You had the judge throw out the ruling. You have everybody essentially trying to reset the dinner table on the workers' comp law. That looks to be, an almost, session stealer, if you will.
Well, the hard part, I think, in the insurance world is, to focus on more than one of these big issues at a time. And workers' comp it's pressing. I mean, they don't really have a choice but to deal with workers' comp. Right. I guess they don't have to deal with it, but I think they will. Right. There's a lot of pressure to deal with it. Essentially what's happened is the insurance regulators approved a 14.5% rate increase that went into effect on December 1st. Now there's litigation about whether that rate increase is going to go forward because a Leon County judge said there was sunshine law violations in the rate making process. But regardless, I think that's going to have to be dealt with or going to be dealt with during the session because a lot of it goes back to the Supreme Court, Florida Supreme Court, earlier this year, finding parts of the workers' compensation law unconstitutional. Yeah. And when they did that, it triggered a large part of this rate increase. And the business community is it's
big ramifications for small businesses just as much as big businesses and for plaintiffs as well.
On both sides is a big issue, and the business community is putting a lot of pressure on the legislature to jump into this issue, fix it, to try to hold down rates.
Right.
So I think that's going to be. I think that's going to be the most pressing insurance issue during the 2017 session. Right. And then you get into some of these others, and whether there's time and energy to do it, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. All right, so let's talk briefly about Speaker Corcoran. Speaker Corcoran was making the rounds last week. They were doing Representative 101, if you will, but he also gave a few speeches that y'all reported on. What happened there?
Well, he primarily talked at the Associated Industries had their annual conference, and Speaker Corcoran, he drops a few bombs just about everywhere he goes. But one of the issues he was talking about was revisiting this issue of term limits for judges, and he has been particularly critical of the Supreme Court. I mean, these workers' comp, are the rulings are some of the latest, but he and the business and business community folks have been, and Republican legislators and Governor Scott have been very critical of some of the things the Supreme Court has done in recent years. And he's talking about putting term limits on judges. He was appealing to the business community to get behind this effort. It's going to be a hard political lift to be able to put term limits on judges. Because for one thing, you need to pass a constitutional amendment which requires 60% of the vote. That's pretty difficult to do on a fundamental question like that. There's going to be a lot of people on the other side of that issue. So, that was one of the major things he was pushing to try to get business community support for that. It may be something that comes up during the Constitution Revision Commission, which starts to meet next year, and will put things on the 2018 ballot. That may be one of the avenues that he could take, try to push that forward.
I think in recent times it's just they have not been necessarily as much in the crosshairs publicly as the Supreme Court and their term limits as they have recently. I mean, this is an issue that seems like you've got a lot of powers that be aligning to put in term limits, and the proponents would argue that if term limits are good for elected officials, they might be good for those.
It's
justices.
such a fundamental change, though. That's what I think is and
they're above the fray. They're outside of the election process.
It is a constitutional fundamental change, and I think there's going to be a lot of people on the other side that will line up against that change. And with the constitutional amendment, it's 60% is a difficult threshold to make.
Well, we're talking judges. So has Governor Scott made any picks yet of the three candidates that were sent to him, or what do you expect there?
He is not, but I'm expecting it to happen relatively soon. Supreme Court Justice James Perry retires at the end of the month, and the indication has been that the governor would like to have somebody in place at that point to replace Justice Perry, hit the ground running in January. So he has three nominees in front of him. With the holidays coming up, I'm expecting it to happen relatively soon. That way the person could be in place. A couple of the nominees are already sitting appeals court judges, so that makes it a little easier for them. That's Alan Lawson and Wendy Berger down from the 5th District Court of Appeal. They may be able to transition that a little bit easier than the third candidate, Daniel Gerber, who's a litigator down in Orlando. But still, I think the governor would like to have whoever it is on the bench when oral arguments are held in January and as cases keep flowing through. So.
Well, the Senate's in, and they're dealing now with what? Medical marijuana.
Well, a lot of this week,
or the implementing law.
A lot of this week is introductory things, but yeah, one of the things that the Senate Health Policy Committee is going to do this week is talk about implementing medical marijuana, where we are with medical marijuana. The constitutional amendment passed in last month by a large margin. So the legislature is going to have to figure out how to carry that out. There's already some infrastructure in place, but the issue is how to that industry. There's a lot of people wanting to get in that industry, and right now it's relatively limited.
Well,
so the legislature's going to be facing some pressure on that.
The opponents argued, that the definition of doctor in that constitutional amendment was undefined. It didn't say medical doctor. So there are a lot of other people that want to get into that industry as a scriptwriter, if you will. So I'll be interested to see how the legislature comes down on that definition.
Well, one of the other interesting things that we're seeing across the state in different communities are thinking about putting moratoriums on these dispensing, the businesses that actually dispense the marijuana. So there's a lot of activity even outside of Tallahassee because people are waiting to see how this is going to play out. And
additionally, you got President-elect Trump coming in, who arguably will not have the same stance, possibly, as the previous or the current president that has let states run with this kind of law. If they start cracking down in all the states that have decided to arguably defy federal law, will Florida make it past this?
Well, and it's probably harder to put the genie back in the bottle in a place like Colorado or California or someplace like that where the markets are already humongous.
Our economic development people will love that little quote.
Whereas Florida, it still is sort of in the initial stages. So I don't think we know what the Trump administration will do on that issue. But you're right. The hints or the signals are that they're not going to be. Jeff Sessions, who is his pick for U.S. Attorney General, is not a fan of legalization and drug legalization. So there could be.
But the proponents just lobbied up last week with two powerful lobbyists in Tallahassee and the Marinette Group and a couple others. So they're geared up and ready for the fight.
Well, and also I think the reality is that if the legislature doesn't pass something that suits John Morgan, who was the attorney who backed this amendment, that there may be some litigation as to, that the legislature is not carrying out the will of the voters.
Right.
So there's all kinds of cross currents there on that issue.
It should be interesting to see how that one plays out. I know that'll be heavily charged. So we'll stay tuned to News Service of Florida to see the next stories that inform Florida on what's going on in Tallahassee. Thanks, appreciate it. All right, that's all the time we have. For more news, views, and insights, please go to our website at capitaldatelineonline.com or check us out on our Facebook page. Thanks and have a great week.